So I've started a new assembly file. This is a metric assembly. And right now, the first thing we want to do is make sure that this is saved because it will ask us to save it in a couple of seconds anyway. We might as well do it right off the bat so we know where everything's going to go. Now, I don't know about you, but I have so many files on my computer. It's really necessary for me to put things where I need to have them so I can find them. So I have all these different places where I have saved files, and I'm just going to save it in this one called Gear Example because it allows me to keep track of things. And I am going to just call this one Gear 2 because it's the second attempt, and I'm just going to overwrite that one because I'm going to throw it away at the end so I don't clutter up all the things that I really want to save. All right, so now we have a saved assembly. It's called Gear 2. And over here on the very left-hand side is something called Engineering Reference. Now, if it's not showing up, you can always use this trick to say, oh, I want the engineering reference, and lock that in, so it's basically locked. So we can turn it off so it's not hidden. But this engineering reference allows us to create a lot of different shapes and different things, and it's got all those tables built into it. So, like the threads that we put on shafts and things, those are all standardized. Well, so are things like spur gears and springs and, all the way down to beams and columns and that type of thing. So what we want to do in this example is to do a rack and pinion. So to open these up, you just double click on them, and that opens up a little dialog box. And so what this is telling us that, okay, we've got all these different dimensions, and we need to pay attention to those dimensions. For example, I know this is going to come out, and right now I'm going to go to the options, and the options basically are pretty straightforward, except that for the face width, I want to use my own specifications. Everything else, if you don't know what it means, then you probably want to do the defaults. All right, so we got our center to center diameters, and this allows us to do some planning. And because I've added that option for defining my width, where it says B for face width, this is the thickness here. Right now it's at 30 millimeters, which is pretty thick. So I'm going to drop this down to 15. And so now I've defined my own width. And my rack, I want to be a little bit longer. So I'm going to specify it at 100. Now, rack and pinion is a gear set where we have a rack, which is a flat gear, and a pinion, which is a round gear, but it meshes nicely with that flat gear. So as we rotate the pinion, the rack travels back and forth. And if you think about your automobile, that's the way the automobile steering works. We have a pinion that's connected to your steering wheel, and the rack, which is connected to the travel on your connecting rods out to the tires. So as we turn it in one direction, it pulls the rack in one direction, and your wheels pivot. So it allows us to steer. Now we got to define a material for this, and I know for the loading that I want to put on there, instead of just user specified, I want to do a structural steel number 55. And if you notice, it puts in a different load for contact and bending stress. Now, if you know exactly what you want and know how you're going to load it, then you can define it as a user defined and say you wanted to make it out of a plastic. You could do that. But you know, it's always nice to have something that's, you know, is going to work. So when you're all set, you just hit the calculate button and it'll either say pass or fail. And if you fail, then that means the program doesn't think it's going to be strong enough for your use. So once you've passed, then you can go ahead and create. And so I'll click on create and you will see it think for a bit. And you'll come up and if you'll notice, it's going to give you a tooth pattern like this. And we can, you know, call this, this is our pinion. So I'm going to call it pinion. And then it's going to open up another part. And if you'll notice, you know, this is just a rectangle. And I'm going to call this one the rack. I already have one called rack, so it'll ask me if I want to overwrite. And then it'll come back and place them in the assembly. And so we get a pinion gear and we get a rack. And eventually it says, okay, here's your rack and pinion. And so if I just take my ability to rotate it, you can see how the teeth mesh. And, you know, we could then take this into an animation setup. So when we rotate this gear, this rack travels. And it makes a really nice, you know, presentation. So your students might use this on the bathroom door design, or they might use it on the Nutcracker, or any of the other automated training wheels for a bike, for example. So there's a lot of places where we might use, you know, these gears. And again, there are just so many in the engineering reference of different things that you can make just with a few simple clicks. So I will leave you to design your projects, and this will just show you how you can create some of these things relatively quickly.